Ryan O'Reilly shed some light on his decision to not resign in Toronto. Plus, we're going to go over some things that Mitch Marner had to say about the ongoing contract negotiations with William Nylander and Auston Matthews. We'll discuss that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's your team every day. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet, joined today by my good friend, Frank Stanisci. He is filling in with Mike still on vacation. I should have like a Mike vacation countdown for when he's expected to come back. But he is away on vacation, so Frank has graciously agreed to help step in for me. And just to remind everybody that Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast. We are no longer going to be doing 5 episodes a week. We are now down to 3 episodes a week as we are in fully off-season mode because 5 shows a week with no news is a little tough to do sometimes. So make sure you still subscribe for free wherever you get your podcast from, and you can make sure you catch us up on YouTube, Locked On Leafs, and we'll be doing this 3 days a week until roughly September, I believe, is when we're going to be going back to 5 a week. So we're still going to be bringing you that Leafs content. We'll be bringing that Leafs news. So make sure you guys continue to stick around for that. Frank, how goes it? It's been a little while since I've had you.
First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invitation and the participation.
No problem. And so it's been really, let's just say, any sort of headline you kind of grab at it because there's really not much that's been discussed. We're kind of waiting in the wings for some news. There's not really a lot happening. And the one that jumped out to me was the one that happened on Monday where Ryan O'Reilly kind of did one of his first – he's done interviews since signing in Nashville, kind of his first with the Toronto media. He was on TSN 1050 First Up, and he basically discussed his decisions, part of the reasons why he moved to the Predators, and he was asked whether or not the spotlight of playing in Toronto played a factor. And this is what he had to say. It wasn't the ultimate decision there. I think so many things come into play, but yeah, I think that is a factor as well when talking about the spotlight. It is different. It is something I did enjoy for the time there, but I just felt it was better to be somewhere else. There are many great things that do come with that, though. I think that the team is amazing with the pieces they had this year. They're going to be right there contending. It is an amazing place. Like anywhere, there are 2 sides to it. That last part there kind of raised an eyebrow. There are 2 sides to it. Now, does he mean there's 2 sides to it in that there's 2 sides to it when it's involving a player in the spotlight? Because obviously everyone thinks the spotlight isn't necessarily always a bad thing, but maybe he's trying to shed light on, spotlight can be a little tough for some people.
I think he just was basically saying there are positives and negatives to being a Toronto Maple Leaf. And unfortunately, when he added them up, the negatives were a little stronger.
Yeah, I mean, Nashville, we know how Nashville is. Nashville's a great place to live. They're not going to be – he believes they could be a contending team. He did say that in the interview, and I kind of raised my eyebrow there because – they didn't necessarily make the moves to me that suggests they're going to go and contend. Maybe they'll try to go back to the playoffs, but contending, I don't know about that. I do wonder, though, that some people always talked about, well, he chose Nashville over Toronto even though they offered the same contract. And now, I think Brad Treliving also, kind of shed light on that when he said that, spotlight does play a factor. It's tough to be that homebound kid playing in your city because it's not just the fans, it's not just me, but it's also your own family and things like that. The pressure that comes with that, you're trying to there's a lot of pressure playing in Toronto. We know that. We know the playoff miseries that have happened. The team constantly had to hear about getting over the hump in the first round. Now it's the whole 1967, not having won a cup in that time. It's not easy. That pressure has never been easy, and it's been like this, Frank, for God, how long? You probably know you've been following this team a lot longer than I have, and you know that this has probably been.
Well, coming from the old guy in this group, um, I you know, pressure is something that you can feed on, or it can overwhelm you, or anywhere in between. I think what you have here with O'Reilly is that he has won a Stanley Cup. So, been there, done that. Now he's working. Let's try to recall also that, and consider the fact that these guys are working for a living. And just like anybody who works at a job, there are perks to the job. And then there are things that I wouldn't call perks. He established that in his conversation, that the perks were overwhelmed by the challenges. Being a Maple Leaf is really hard. I agree with you 100%. The problem with being a Maple Leaf, a New York Ranger, an LA King, is that that pressure exists. What doesn't exist is an amount of money that helps you to say, okay, I'll take on that pressure. If all things are equal, which in the National Hockey League they aren't, as we know, because taxes and those kinds of things, there are ways to make more money. There are ways to enjoy your work. There are ways to feel challenged and accept those challenges. That's a menu of things that people who are players have to pick from. We just heard from the ex-Leaf that it was too much for me, and that's fine. And that's fine. I just think that what that means to me is, with the Maple Leafs, they need to find guys, unfortunately, with a high level of character and an extremely thick skin. And it's not easy having a thick skin. We all get affected. So it makes it hard to be a Maple Leaf, because you're always being judged. And let's face it, Leaf fans, I'm speaking to you. You can be unfair, and that unfairness does tend to taint decisions to the negative. In other words, not playing for the Leafs, because players are people. And this is why sometimes I kind of want to pull my hair out when I hear some of the stuff, coming out of the Leaf fans. In a sense, I guess what I'm saying is that Leaf fans are their own worst enemy at times, or at least some of them are, not all of them. Many of them are great, promoters of playing for Toronto. But there are a few who make a lot of noise that make it difficult to be a Maple Leaf. And yes, that is hard to accept for you, that players are human.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I see it when I hear people talk about Auston Matthews being soft,
Yep.
And I'm just like, I mean, the guy led the all NHL forwards and block shots. That doesn't necessarily speak to me as soft. Does he hit every chance he gets? No, but that's not the type of player he is, right? And so you do see it. You can see how the fan base can turn. It's just like, and what Ryan O'Reilly kind of said, like the Leafs are like the New York Yankees of the NHL, right? It's great when you're having success, but when you're not having success, it can get intense. Now, that intensity can be a good thing, because there's a lot of passion with this fan base. Passion is never a bad thing, but there's got to be that balance, right? The players can't always feel like there's this hanging doom cloud over them, or like the fans are ready to turn on you just because you're not doing exactly what they want you to do, right? It's something that's always been the issue here in Toronto. We're going to discuss a little bit more on that, because it does relate to some of the things that Mitch Marner and Mitch Marner had to say about Auston Matthews, Will Nylander's contract, plus Brad Treliving coming over. So we're going to discuss a little bit more of that on the other side. This is Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And, right now you can take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel. Get 10 times your first bet and amounts of bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll add $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from the money line, over under, who's going to hit the first home run in the game, anything really you put your money towards, you can go and get yourself $200 in bonus bets, all on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB, NHL, whatever sport you follow is there over at FanDuel, because it is America's #1 sports book. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get up to $200 of bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball and the Locked On Podcast Network.
David, can I add something on the other side where we left off before the ad?
Mm-hmm.
There's also the issue that fans think that players don't try, that you talked about a little bit or hinted at. The thing about trying really hard, there's a saying in hockey: they squeeze their sticks a little too hard.
Yep.
So the pressure also can make you don't necessarily cower from the pressure. That might not be the negative that you deal with, but another negative is you try too hard. Leaf players are human. They see how much support they have. They see how dedicated the majority of the fans are, and they're trying real hard. And sometimes trying real hard doesn't work. There's a relaxed trying kind of hard, and then there's a nervous kind of trying hard. I'll leave folks to figure out which is better.
Yeah, and look, I think when people see, let's say William Nylander has a very he's got a personality that not everybody likes, or he plays in a style that not everybody likes. But what I will say about William Nylander that I do appreciate is it feels like he can kind of leave the noise in the background. He doesn't let the noise get to him in a way, right? Like it doesn't show up too much in his body language.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, he looks like he doesn't care. Really what it is he's just doing his thing. And he doesn't allow himself to be distracted by what you're determining and calling outside noise. And it can be effective.
Yeah, and like, and I said on the other side I was going to talk a little bit more about Mitch Marner, and he had his gala this past weekend, doing his charity event. He does it every year now, and he was talking about Nylander and Matthews, and he was kind of this. They were asking if Marner would get involved if things were getting to a point where nothing was getting done. I mean, what's Mitch Marner like? Is Mitch Marner going to go to Brad Treliving's office and tell him to get it done? No. Is Mitch Marner going to go and grab Nylander Matthews by the neck and say, "All right, let's get this done, boys"? Maybe he'll say something, but I don't think he would do that. Mitch Marner doesn't scream to me as that type of player. But what he said, he had this to say about both of his teammates. And he says, "I know that both of them have a lot of joy and love for this team and want to be here. We'll see if need be. I'm going to try and get involved and help on both sides. But at the same time, they're my buddies before they are teammates, and I'm going to look at them as that." So
he's more concerned with them showing up at his wedding, right?
Yeah, at his wedding, which we don't know exactly when that's going to be. And that good. I don't want to know when Mitch Marner is getting married.
So how much is a plate dinner there? What do you think he's? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm doing an Italian thing.
He did say I mean, I don't even know what type of wedding, or if it's indoor, outdoor, where it is, all those things. So I do think there's
there'll be plenty of white all around.
Yeah, he did say he likes a good party. It should be a good time, he said. So I think for Marner, he understands that you gotta have some enjoyment here. Try to find a way to enjoy things as a team, not let the outside noise impact you. And he said something about Brad Treliving that I think speaks to the psyche of the players a little bit, because we know the players we know that the one thing about Kyle Dubas that all the players loved is he had their backs. He was one, even the ones that maybe didn't deserve the defense of their general manager, those that didn't play well, or those that maybe got into a situation where they deserved some criticism. Kyle Dubas had their backs. And this is what Marner had to say about Brad Treliving, because we know Brad Treliving didn't throw players under the bus or anything when he came here. He said Brad came in and defended us all really in our team. It meant a lot to us to come in and for him to come in to do that. It's not just 4 guys on our team. It's a full team effort every single night. It's not the narrative a lot of times, but we all know we got to be better, and that's why we're all excited to get the season going. The fact that, Brad Treliving came in and the main thing he tried to do was denounce this idea of the core four and say it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's not Marner, Matthews, Tavares, Nylander as well. Like, I think this is again a general manager playing to the psyche of the players, and you see that in Marner's comments. You need that when it comes to this market and when it comes to these players. I'm not saying they need to be sheltered. They don't need to be coddled, but they need to know the organization has their back because they do take their fair share of criticism. Now, it's not. I'm not saying it's undeserved criticism because these guys are being paid a lot of money, and they haven't delivered what they're being paid a lot of money to do, which is to win. So what do you think about that idea, though, of the players kind of, I wouldn't say needing the general manager to come out and defend them, but to have the general manager do that for them?
As far as the general manager is concerned, he is one of the first lines of information that the media listen to, because whenever the general manager talks, the media listens, because quite frankly they're not out there every day like the players and the coach, right? They only talk once in a while, and if something really horrible happens, they get asked questions. So for him to take a lead foot in support of his players is a helpful thing. What I will say is, as far as Mitch Marner is concerned, he's not one of the players that he's not an O'Reilly guy. He's a guy who feeds on the fame. We saw him at the Shania Twain concert. He made an appearance on stage there. F1, he made an appearance there. He's a guy who loves the fame. The fame is something that he enjoys. I say that because he basically is out there all the time. So he's not one of those players that needs the defense of the general manager, only because he's more than willing to speak on his own behalf. So I guess what I'm saying is the general manager can help, right? But it's irrelevant if the players can handle it themselves. So when the general manager does talk, that means there's some concern somewhere. And like I said, the general manager, you don't hear from him unless something's going on. Mm-hmm. So for him to say that something was going on that he needed to comment on, was it a good reason to comment? I'm on the fence, but he did, and I think the intention was good.
Yeah, I think the intention. Yeah, the intent. It's always like you have to think about what's the intention. What are they trying to? What's the message they're trying to get across? And I think for Brad Treliving, he's coming into a situation that, let's face it, not an easy one, because there's constantly the talk about. Again, he came in and everyone's talking about the core four, and he I think it was just for him. He's just like, well, that's the first issue right there. A team can't be relying on four players to live in, to be the be all and end all. Now, unfortunately, that's the way it's been talked about, because that was something that, in my opinion, Kyle Dubas kind of
absolutely
put that out there when he did the whole "we can and we will" to get all those guys signed. It was always about those guys because they're the ones that are getting half the cap, right? This is like the imbalance of the salaries made everyone feel like, well, yeah, but it is kind of a four-player team, because we always talk about how four players are getting the largest chunk of the pie. And so I can understand why.
And also, David, let's also consider the fact that Dubas was a big influence on this team. And when he left, there was a giant vacuum. And that vacuum now, can Treliving fill it all? And how does he fill that vacuum? Those questions about, he has to answer, because there's this vacuum. Dubas is left. There were impressions left because of Dubas in charge. Now Dubas leaves, and now Treliving is left with picking up the pieces, or I guess the same way he spoke out. Now he has to act in a way that shows what the Treliving Leafs are going to be like, because the Dubas Leafs are history. They're the past.
Yeah, and we kind of know that when you have so many good players on a team, like everyone talks about how, other teams don't have this issue. Well, hate to say it, but not every team has this collection of talent up front, right? Like not everyone has, a Marner, Matthews, Nylander, Tavares, like that group of 4 players. Not many really do. They have good players. I'm not saying they don't have good players, but not every team has all those players kind of in their prime. Now, obviously, Tavares is a little bit is older than Matthews, Marner, and Nylander, but Matthews, Marner, and Nylander have kind of grown up together until all this. There's not many teams that have kind of a trio like that, and that's what makes the Leafs kind of unique in that sense. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's kind of how I see it.
I agree to the extent that very few teams, not none, very few teams have the talent concentration that the Toronto Maple Leafs have in a few players. I think, David, what we're going towards here is, and when we talk about the elephant in the room, I think is you asked about the biggest story. Two things that struck me, biggest stories to me, are Larry Tannenbaum, ironically, thinking about selling a big portion of his ownership to a teacher's pension fund. Have we been here before? It's like a mirror image of what happened. But tied for that is the 1 and 2 year contract, which has a lot to do with what you're talking about. Because with the 1 and 2 year contract, you're not locked in, pun intended. You're not locked into contracts that are long and big. You can make adjustments. We're seeing not just the Leafs have done it. They're on the leading edge of that. 1 and 2 year contracts, because the long-term contract, in essence, is finally being realized as a mistake. And I think it is a mistake. Teams, I joked a long time ago about baseball and them only doing 1 year contracts. A 1 year contract guarantees that a player does something and gets paid for it, not does something and gets paid for 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because a lot of people want that 8-year commitment, because I don't even think I think part of it is they don't have to hear about a contract for the next 8 years. And, they also want to know that there's a little bit of that security. But here's the thing. If a player really likes where they're playing, if they like the team, if the team has success, or maybe doesn't have, even if they don't have success, but they love the situation, you have to have some sort of confidence that player is going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think I think that's kind of what you're getting at. With baseball, players have opt-outs. In the NFL, teams have opt-outs. Players kind of have opt-ins and opt-outs. And they'll do it because they like the team that they play for. So, like, okay, yeah, I'll sign up for, just for the next 3 years, and then then we'll do this again. You have to have some semblance of confidence. Like when it comes to Auston Matthews, it seems everyone's kind of seems of the thinking that maybe it's going to be a maximum 5 years, and everyone's kind of like, well, Nathan MacKinnon gave 8, Connor McDavid gave 8. Here's the thing about Nathan MacKinnon: he won a cup there. He wants to be there for 8 years, and he got paid quite a bit of money to be there too. Connor McDavid, I think if Connor McDavid had his way, he probably wouldn't have signed 8 years for a couple of reasons. One, things haven't gone well in Edmonton, and maybe you put a little more pressure on the organization to do more, because you could say, well, my contract's kind of, I'm not here forever. Let's get this done. But he didn't have that leverage. And you know what? He had it. Everyone's talking about how Connor McDavid is kind of underpaid for what he does. And that's what happens when you sign the 8 years. Everyone says, well, he's doing right for the team, but I have no problem with the player. Yes, you got to make sure you fit in the structure of the team salary. There is a cap. NHL does put a cap on what a player can make. Connor McDavid can't say, I want $20 million. The NHL doesn't allow that. But at the same time, if a player's good and a player is producing for you, like Connor McDavid is probably more than a $12 million player right now.
I disagree. We can have a debate about that.
Okay.
We can have a debate about that.
Look,
I disagree. I think some players expect so much money that it goes beyond their production. How many points more does like Connor McDavid is a beautiful player. He should earn the most money in the National Hockey League. But the reality is, the reason I said that, I was being half tongue in cheek. Can you picture the 4 core Leafs, right? And let's say the better goaltender, Samsonov, in net, playing against the other 12 Leafs? That's my simple point. You need a team to win, and sometimes numbers matter. And in that case, those 4 Leaf players would not do well against the other 12. So there has to be a drag on what guys like Connor McDavid expect, because there's only a pot, and that pot has so much. And if you're going to play against other teams, his excellence, right, is canceled by the fact that if more money he makes, the less the other players are. That's my feeling about it. That's all. I just
So I don't think you're wrong on that. I do think that the issue with the salary cap and the hard salary cap is that's the reality, is that teams have to toe that fine line with how much they can pay their stars while also putting a good team around them.
absolutely.
And to me, that's I mean, the NFL is different because the NFL has established a clear hierarchy of what players can get paid and how much they should get paid. The NBA has basically told teams, you want to pay more than what our salary cap it allows, pay a luxury tax. Same with MLB. You want to give your star players a whole lot of money, here's a luxury tax you're going to have to pay into that. Sure, there is an imbalance, but
Basketball too. They have it too.
yeah, you don't hear
the National Hockey.
you don't hear NBA players or MLB players complain about how much they get paid. In a way, I don't really hear too much, at least from an MLB standpoint, of how much a player gets paid, unless it's a player that gets a ridiculous contract that they never should have gotten in the first place. But the good players, you don't hear about how much they get paid. You don't hear about this guy is overpaid, this guy's overpaid. You don't hear it that much from the good players. In the NBA too. Does anybody talk about how much LeBron James makes every year? Does anyone talk about how much Steph Curry makes every year? No. They talk about maybe Fred VanVleet kind of making a little more than he should. But that's something the NBA has really, I think, done right, is they've made sure that, yes, there is a salary structure that teams will have to follow when it comes to luxury tax. But you know what? If they feel like they want to keep keep their team together and pay every guy what they believe they should get paid, you can go ahead and do that. That's where the hard cap has failed the NHL in that.
Your words. If anybody is paying attention, and I believe I was, and folks, this is the whole point that David's making, is that the greatest players in the league are the responsibility not of the team, but the league. You see, it's the league that benefits with Connor McDavid. Under the system that it is now, only the league benefits. The player doesn't benefit. The team doesn't benefit. That's what I'm hearing with what you're saying. I'm sort of, plus, and that's where I've arrived because of what you said, and I agree 100%. So that's why luxury tax. That's why in the MLS they have star players. They pay an exorbitant amount of money because they benefit the league more than the team. Because under the cap system, those players become a handicap, and that's the truth. To take it back to Locked On Leafs being a Leaf program, those 4 contracts, they strap the Leafs into not winning a Stanley Cup because they can't get past the fact that they have these great players, but they have to have players of lesser value. And then that makes them an average team. Average teams don't win a Stanley Cup. The only teams that win Stanley Cups are teams that are underpaying players in situations where they get on a confidence thing where they really didn't have one, like Florida, for example, like Montreal a couple of years ago. All these examples are teams that weren't paying players a lot of money, but they had players of value who weren't being paid for what they were worth, and then succeeded incredibly, because we've seen the opposite. Teams that succeed end up having difficulty paying the players they have.
I think you also look at the Stanley Cup final. You had a Florida Panthers team that on paper, nobody picked them to win any of their series that they went through. But what do? They had a goaltender that played out of his mind. That is something that always happens.
Overpaid too, right?
An overpaid goaltender too. Yes. Yep. Then you had, obviously they played a style that other teams just wore down teams. The physicality, yes, that was a factor.
They took advantage of playoff officiating. Absolutely.
Yeah, they do have. Now the thing is, Florida does have some star and talent. Matthew Tkachuk, Barkov, all those things. But as a team, you put them up against the Vegas Golden Knights, who, by the way, are a team that exceeded the salary cap again. But I mean, Mark Stone was injured and he came back. I do get that part, but you put those two teams together on paper, 10 times out of 10, you're picking the Vegas Golden Knights to win that series, just because that they had the better collection of talent. And you say about underpaying guys. Well, how about the fact that they kind of exceeded the salary cap?
And Gary Bettman has sworn up and down that this is a hard cap. There will be no cheating involved.
Yeah.
And then he even talked about injuries, players coming back. So with what he said, there should be an investigation into the Stone situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this with Vegas. I mean, they had Robin Leonard go down. They had to get a goaltender to replace him. So like that one, I can understand that one. But the Mark Stone one, where yeah, I heard that his injury was pretty bad, but it was. I also say that he came back and he was, they had 3-4 guys that could have been a Conn Smythe finalist.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Stone was one of them. I didn't expect that from Mark Stone because from what I heard was his injury was so bad that we shouldn't expect much out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where it all ended up being at the end of the day. So I think that's something the NHL is like. Again, we're constantly putting the Leaf stars under blast because they want to get paid, and they all want to get paid, and it's tough because there's not enough of the pie to go around. So players are getting up and fans are getting upset because the players don't want to take less of that pie. And it's going to be this revolving circle. We're going to be dealing with this until all the contracts are done, and then we're going to be complaining about how much these guys are getting paid. I'm of the opinion I hate complaining about what players getting paid after the fact because there's nothing you can do to change it unless you trade the player. And guess what? When you trade the player, you're not getting the value back when you're trading that player because everyone's talking about trading Nylander, and I keep hearing media and analysts saying you're not going to get back the value of what you're trading Nylander to.
Yeah, that's that. But those, I think we've established a need that I feel that's there, and that is that there has to be a way of paying the real stars. When I say real stars, the top 3 or 4 players in the league who are the best at advertising for the league and making the league, promoting the league more than just their teams. Guys like Connor McDavid, there has to be a way to pay them. The hard cap is not working for the big city teams. That's my opinion, and I think that's not good because the big city teams are the populous areas, and those are the areas that it looks like it's doing great, but it could do better if their teams were more competitive. I'm talking with the Rangers, Toronto, New York, and LA, those places there.
Yeah, but it's something they're gonna have. If Vegas can figure out a way, these other teams will have to do it too. And there's going to be copycats of that, I think, going into next year. So we'll see how that all plays out. Frank, I want to thank you for coming on the show with me.
Thank you for having me on. My pleasure.
And I'll probably have you on one more time between now and before Mike gets back. And then maybe we'll have a fan on this week. We had a fan on last Friday. I did have some people reach out. It's a tight criteria to come on the show, everyone. I got to vet. If you do want to come, if there's someone that wants to come on the show, send me a message. I'm going to have to vet you. May have to do a little bit of an application form to get you on the show, but we'll look into doing that for this week. We're still waiting to hear on news from Ilya Samsonov. We're a few days away from that arbitration case. We'll see if that actually does go to arbitration, so we'll keep an eye on that and more going forward. I'd like to thank you all for listening and subscribing to the show, and make sure you continue to give us a positive review. Give us those thumbs up on YouTube. Make sure you tell all your friends and folks where they can get the podcast from. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.
Thank you.